Russian President Vladimir Putin appears to be setting conditions to weaponize the United Nations Security Council, UNSC, as a method of Russian power projection in advance of Russia's accession to the rotating UNSC presidency in April. Russian UN Ambassador Vasily Nebenzia stated during a press conference on March 21 that Russia plans to hold an informal UNSC meeting in early April to discuss the real situation of Ukrainian children taken to Russia. Nebenzia claimed that Russia planned to hold the meeting before the announcement of the International Criminal Court's (ICC) arrest warrants for Putin and Russian Commissioner on Children's Rights Maria Lvova-Belova for the deportation of Ukrainian children to Russia. Nebenzia's announcement, as well as vitriolic denials of the ICC's accusations by Russian officials, come as Kremlin-appointed occupation officials continue to facilitate the deportation of Ukrainian children to Russia under a variety of schemes and guises. Putin additionally made a number of notable comments proclaiming Russia's commitment to the UN, UNSC, and the UN Charter during his press conference with Chinese President Xi Jinping on March 21. Taken in tandem, Nebenzia's and Putin's comments suggest that Russia continues to use its position on the UNSC as a base of power projection as the UNSC prepares for Russia to take the UNSC presidency in April. By setting information conditions to posture about Russia's supposed commitment to the UNSC, Putin is positioning himself to continue to weaponize and exploit Russia's UNSC veto power in the coming months. The second day of Chinese President Xi Jinping's visit with Russian President Vladimir Putin continued to suggest that Putin has not been able to secure the no-limits bilateral partnership with China that he likely hoped for. Putin and Xi signed a joint statement by the Russian Federation and the People's Republic of China on deepening comprehensive partnership and strategic cooperation, entering a new era on March 21, which stressed that Russian-Chinese relations are comprehensive, strategic, and at the highest level in history. The joint statement outlines a variety of bilateral intentions and affirms the commitment of Russia and China to each other's state sovereignty and territorial integrity, among other diplomatic promises. The commitments made by Xi and Putin were notably lopsided, however, indicating that Xi is agreeing to a more reserved version of Russian-Chinese relations than Putin likely desires, as ISW observed on March 20. She praised Putin, reaffirmed China's commitment to Russia in the UNSC, and amplified China's position on a political settlement of the war in Ukraine, but she did not go much further than offering those statements. Putin, by contrast, announced a number of measures that signal Russia's continued orientation towards and dependence on China in the energy and economic sectors, which appear very one-sided compared to Xi's relatively tempered commitments. She additionally did not signal an intent to provide support for Russia's war in Ukraine beyond vague diplomatic assurances, which is likely a step down from what Putin hoped to secure in negotiations. Putin has likely failed to secure the exact sort of partnership that he needs and desires, and she will likely leave Moscow having secured assurances that are more one-sided than Putin intended them to be. Putin observed that Russia and China had a very substantiative and candid exchange of views on the prospects for the further development of Russian-Chinese relations. Such rhetoric notably lacks the language normally used in diplomatic readouts to indicate that the two parties have come to definitive and substantive agreements. Putin portrayed the Western provision of depleted uranium ammunition to Ukraine as a significant escalation in order to bolster information operations aiming to deter Western security assistance to Ukraine and to place the onus for negotiations on the West. Putin claimed on March 21, while discussing the Chinese peace plan, that the West is beginning to use weapons with a nuclear component in a response to the UK's announcement that it would provide Ukraine with shells with depleted uranium. Putin claimed that the UK's provision of depleted uranium shells indicated that the West is not ready for a peaceful settlement. Anti-tank munitions in the West are commonly made of depleted uranium, that is, uranium that is less radioactive than natural uranium due to its high density and the penetrative effect it generates. Such munitions cannot be used to produce either nuclear or radiological weapons. Putin seeks to portray the provision of depleted uranium shells as escalatory in order to deter Western security assistance despite the shells not containing any fissile or radiological material. The Wagner Group may lose most of its convict force in the upcoming weeks as convicts finish their 6-month military contracts. The UK Ministry of Defence, MOD, assessed that thousands of Wagner convicts who were recruited during fall 2022 will be pardoned and released, given that Wagner appears to be sticking to its promise of releasing convicts after 6 months of service. The UK MOD forecasted that the exodus of convict forces would worsen Wagner personnel shortages as the Kremlin has also blocked Wagner from recruiting additional prisoners. The Kremlin had previously confirmed on January 27 that Russian President Vladimir Putin is issuing preemptive pardons for convicts who serve in Russian combat operations in Ukraine. The Kremlin's announcement aligns with the ISW established timeline of Putin's decision to completely distance himself from Wagner Group financier Yevgeny Prigozhin following the fall of Soledar, Donetsk Oblast, on January 12 to 13. The Kremlin had likely deliberately authorized the publicization of preemptive pardons to incentivize more Wagner convicts to leave following the expiration of their contracts to further erode the Wagner force. Prigozhin has developed a brand consistently mocking the Russian MOD for its disregard for the troops' well-being and is unlikely to anger a convict force by retaining them on the front lines past the expiration of their contracts. The Russian Federal Security Service, FSB, and the Russian National Guard, Rosgvardia, launched a criminal investigation into the deputy commander of the Rosgvardia's Central District, Major General Vadim Dragomiritsky, on March 20. Russian State Duma parliamentarian Alexander Kinstein stated that Dragomiritsky is suspected of receiving multimillion-dollar bribes and abusing his power and will face subsequent dismissal from his position. Kinstein said that officials forced Dragomiritsky to admit his guilt in a written confession. Dragomiritsky was suspected of having received bribes from a contractor who reconstructed a military unit in the Moscow Oblast. The accusations follow Russian President Vladimir Putin's bill on March 18 that increased fines and jail time for the misappropriation of Russian military assets. Kinstein stated that the Rosgvardia leadership's investigation proves its dedication to purifying their ranks. The Kremlin may use the premise of misappropriation of military funds to oust officials who have fallen out of favor. The U.S. Department of Defense, DoD, announced on March 20 that it authorized a presidential drawdown to provide an additional $350 million of security assistance to Ukraine. The DoD stated that the package will include ammunition for HIMARS, 155mm artillery rounds, HARMS missiles, and other critical military equipment. Russian forces conducted limited ground attacks along the Kupiansk-Svatov-Kreminna line on March 21. The Ukrainian General Staff reported that Russian forces conducted unsuccessful offensive operations near Masyakivka, 15 kilometers northeast of Kupiansk, Novoselivsk, 15 kilometers northwest of Svatov, Bilohorivka, 10 kilometers south of Kreminna, and Verkhnokamiansk, 20 kilometers south of Kreminna. Geolocated footage published on March 20 indicates that Russian forces have advanced towards Terny, about 15 kilometers northwest of Kreminna. Ukrainian Eastern Group of Forces spokesperson Colonel Serhiy Cherevity stated that the Kupiansk-Lyman direction is under the heaviest Russian artillery fire and that Russian forces use Soviet-era armored vehicles and older tanks more actively on this line. The Russian Ministry of Defense, MOD, claimed on March 21 that unspecified motorized rifle units disrupted two Ukrainian troop rotations near Dvorykna, 17 kilometers northeast of Kupiansk, and Sinkivka, 8 kilometers northeast of Kupiansk, and discovered 2 Ukrainian sabotage groups near Berestov, 24 kilometers northwest of Svatov, and Novoselivsk. A Russian millblogger claimed that positional battles continue west of Ploshchenka and near the Zurovka Gully, within 18 kilometers northwest of Kremlin. A millblogger claimed that Russian forces attempted to break through Ukrainian positions in Novoselivsk and conducted offensive operations towards Yampolivka, Terny, Nevsk, and Makiivka. Another millblogger published footage on March 21 reportedly of the 4th Brigade of the 2nd Luhansk People's Republic (LNR) Army Corps operating in the forests near Kremlin. Russian forces did not make any confirmed gains in or around Bakhmut on March 21. The Ukrainian General Staff reported that Ukrainian forces repelled Russian assaults near Bakhmut, within 11 kilometers northwest of Bakhmut near Orakovo-Vasilivka, Kryharivka, and Bodanivka, and within 22 kilometers southwest of Bakhmut near Ivanivsk, Pretekine, and Pivnik. Ukrainian Eastern Grouping of Forces spokesperson Colonel Serhiy Cherevity reported that there were 13 combat clashes in Bakhmut, a notable decrease from the 24 combat clashes in the city that he reported on March 16. The Ukrainian General Staff specified that Ukrainian forces repelled Russian assaults in northern Bakhmut, likely suggesting that Russian forces are concentrating offensive operations on the northern part of the city. Russian millbloggers claimed that Wagner Group fighters continued assaults in the Azom industrial complex in northern Bakhmut and that they control most of the complex, although ISW has not observed visual confirmation of these claims. Russian millbloggers claimed that Russian forces advanced from southwestern areas of Bakhmut towards the city center on March 19 and 20, although ISW has not observed visual confirmation that Russian forces have done so. The Listian Volunteer Battalion of the Cossack Don Brigade published footage on March 18 claiming to show the formation fighting in Bakhmut itself, possibly indicating that the Cossack Don Brigade has ties with the Wagner Group in the area. A Russian millblogger claimed that Wagner fighters conducted an assault towards Kromov, 2 kilometers west of Bakhmut, and broke through Ukrainian defenses in the direction of Kryharivka, 6 kilometers northwest of Bakhmut. Another Russian millblogger claimed that Russian forces conducted assaults west of Kurdyamivka, 13 kilometers southwest of Bakhmut, and that Ukrainian forces conducted unsuccessful counterattacks southwest of Bakhmut. Russian forces continued offensive operations along the outskirts of Donetsk city on March 21. The Ukrainian General Staff reported that Russian forces conducted unsuccessful offensive operations near Avdiivka, within 14 kilometers north of Avdiivka near Novobakhmutivka, Berdikai, and Krasnovarivka, and within 36 kilometers southwest of Avdiivka near Severn, Pervomaysk, Marinka, Pobieda, and Novomykhailivka. A Russian millblogger claimed that Russian forces are attempting to advance towards Orlivka, 8 kilometers northwest of Avdiivka, following the likely Russian capture of Stepov, 9 kilometers northwest of Avdiivka. A prominent Russian millblogger claimed that Ukrainian forces still hold positions in Stepov. ISW assesses that Russian forces likely captured Stepov based on a Ukrainian General Staff report of Russian assaults near Berdikai, 10 kilometers northwest of Avdiivka, and 1 kilometer west of Stepov, on March 19. A Russian millblogger claimed that Russian forces advanced near Stepov and Kamianka as well as towards the southern outskirts of Avdiivka, where fierce fighting has reportedly been ongoing for the past 5 days. Russian millbloggers also claimed that Russian forces are trying to advance north of Vodiane, 8 kilometers southwest of Bakhmut. A Russian millblogger purportedly in contact with personnel from the Donetsk People's Republic, DNR, 1st Slavic Brigade claimed that the formation has suffered heavy losses and conducts assaults without artillery support in the Avdiivka area. ISW previously reported that the increased tempo of Russian operations in the Avdiivka area has led to major losses and is likely a misguided effort to pull Ukrainian forces away from other areas of the front. Russian sources offered diverging views on the Russian military's ability to encircle Avdiivka and the significance of the settlement. Some Russian sources claimed that Russian forces are threatening to encircle Ukrainian forces in Avdiivka from the north, east, and south, and that the capture of Stepov cut the railway line that Ukrainian forces used to supply its grouping in Avdiivka. A Russian mill blogger claimed that Russian forces are attempting to advance towards Orlivka to cut Ukrainian ground lines of communication, blocks, that lead from Orlivka, Lastikine, 4 kilometers northwest of Avdiivka, and Tonenk, 7 kilometers west of Avdiivka, into Avdiivka, and will soon encircle Avdiivka. Other prominent mill bloggers argued that Russian forces are not close to encircling Avdiivka and called on other Russian sources to stop premature conversations about the topic. One mill blogger stated that the current difficulties of the Russian advance in the Avdiivka area confirm that Russian forces are not closer to victory. Russian sources offered diverging views on the importance of capturing Avdiivka, with one Russian mill blogger arguing that the settlement is a significant industrial area, while another questioned how capturing Avdiivka would significantly change the operational situation along the outskirts of Donetsk city when Ukrainian positions in Karlivka, 16 kilometers northwest of Avdiivka, and Kurakov, 25 kilometers west of Donetsk city, are just as fortified as those in Avdiivka. ISW continues to assess that Russian advances could prompt Ukrainian command to decide to withdraw from Avdiivka, although that does not appear likely at this time. Russian forces did not conduct any confirmed ground attacks in western Donetsk Oblast on March 21st. Supporting effort, Southern Axis, Russian objective, maintain frontline positions and secure rear areas against Ukrainian strikes. Ukraine's main intelligence directorate, GUR, reported on March 20th that explosions in occupied Zankoy, Crimea destroyed Russian caliber NK cruise missiles during their transport via railroad. Russian mill bloggers published footage purportedly showing explosions and the aftermath of explosions in Zankoy and claimed that if a drone had struck a supply of missiles, a secondary explosion should have been visible. The Russian Investigative Committee notably announced it is opening an investigation into drone activity following the reported drone strike in Zankoy. Russian forces conducted routine shelling in Zaporizhia and Kherson oblasts on March 21st. Mobilization and force generation efforts, Russian objective, expand combat power without conducting general mobilization. The Kremlin continues crypto mobilization campaigns to recruit men across Russia for contract service to avoid declaring a formal second mobilization wave. Representative of the Ukrainian Main Military Intelligence Directorate, GUR, Andriy Yusov, stated that Russia recruits 20,000 servicemen per month via crypto mobilization schemes. Yusov noted that Russia continues to lack trainers and is using Belarusian training grounds to train the mobilized servicemen. The Ukrainian General Staff reported that Russian conscripts from Krasnodar Krai are signing contracts to deploy to Ukraine in August 2023. Russian recruitment officials are likely coercing conscripts into signing contracts, and Russian independent media reported that the Moscow Aviation Institute withheld diplomas from graduates who refused to sign military contracts. Russian local outlets reported that military enlistment offices are threatening private companies with fines if they do not provide personal information about their male employees up to 50 years of age. Russian outlets also reported that Russian recruitment officials continue to distribute summonses to students and civilian men to clarify their personal information. The Wagner Group also continues to expand its recruitment campaigns across Russia and opened another recruitment center in Rostov-on-Don. Russian millbloggers are increasingly assessing that the Kremlin is unlikely to declare another mobilization wave and is instead in favor of a contract service recruitment campaign. A millblogger noted that the Kremlin will only declare mobilization if regional authorities are unable to generate the desired quota of volunteers. The millblogger noted that the Kremlin is advertising contract service to regenerate forces without mobilization. Another millblogger noted that the Kremlin's recruitment campaign is set up for failure, stating that the Russian Ministry of Defense, MOD, had not been effective in promoting recruitment drives. The millblogger noted that the Kremlin is unlikely to generate the desired 400,000 troops because most of the volunteers that wanted to fight in the war already enlisted during previous recruitment drives. The millblogger noted that Wagner Group and Chechen Akhmet units are the only formations that have been able to effectively recruit volunteers and speculated that the Russian MOD only was able to mobilize 230,000 servicemen in September 2022. The millblogger's observations support previous ISW's assessments that the renewed volunteer recruitment campaign is unlikely to fulfill Russia's ongoing need for timely reinforcements. Russian servicemen who joined regional volunteer battalions over the summer of 2022 revealed that the Russian military command treats Russian volunteers like cannon fodder. Russian independent outlet Important Stories, iStories, interviewed a Russian volunteer from Kazan's Alga Volunteer Battalion who is currently accused of desertion. The volunteer revealed that his battalion suffered tremendous losses on the west, right, bank Kherson Oblast during the Ukrainian counteroffensive in November 2022. The servicemen, alongside some other elements of the battalion, received permission from company and battalion commanders to quit after 4 months of contract service, but commanders of the 72nd Brigade refused to dismiss them. ISW could not locate any information about a Russian 72nd Brigade, which was named in the iStories report. The subordination of the volunteer battalion to a brigade may indicate that some Russian volunteer battalions were embedded in existing or new units. The volunteer also revealed that Ukrainian forces largely destroyed the Alga Volunteer Battalion near Volodar on February 6, 2023. Russian involuntary recruitment campaigns, if declared again, would further worsen brain drain problems in the country. Radio Liberty and Current Time uncovered that 250 of Russia's most prominent doctors fled the country on September 27, 2022, 6 days after Russian President Vladimir Putin declared mobilization. The Russian Supreme Court developed and presented a draft resolution that explains which activities the court would rule as a crime against military service. The court proposed on March 21 to introduce punishments for attempted unauthorized abandonment of a military unit and desertion. The draft would allow the court to punish servicemen who were absent from their units for less than 2 days, which is currently not an offense under existing law. The draft defined desertion as an offense in which a serviceman intends to evade his military duties, and the court will be able to prosecute anyone who evaded service within 15 years after reaching the age limit of being in reserve. The draft also noted that Russian servicemen should fully resist capture and fulfill military obligations even in a complete encirclement. A Russian human rights advocate noted that any Russian serviceman who is captured would be investigated under the Russian Criminal Code. Chinese entities reportedly continue to supply drones and drone parts to Russia. The New York Times reported that official Russian customs data shows that nearly 70 Chinese exporters sold 26 brands of drones and drone parts worth more than $12 million to Russian entities since the start of Russia's invasion of Ukraine. The Chinese drone maker Autel has reportedly sold $2 million worth of drones to Russian entities alone. Chinese firms appear to be increasing their sale of commercially available drones to Russia, which have dual-use purposes that Russian forces can employ on the battlefield in Ukraine. These commercially available drones likely do not have payload capacities that would allow Russian forces to employ them in significant combat or high-precision strike roles. It still remains uncertain whether Chinese leadership will decide to allow the Chinese defense industry to sell lethal equipment to Russia. Activity in Russian-occupied areas, Russian objective, consolidate administrative control of and annexed areas, forcibly integrate Ukrainian civilians into Russian socio-cultural, economic, military, and governance systems. Russian forces continue to conduct law enforcement operations in occupied areas to target pro-Ukrainian sentiment and coerce compliance with passportization measures. Chechen Republic head Ramzan Kadyrov posted footage on March 21 of Chechen riot police of the Akhmet 1 formation conducting a law enforcement sweep in an unnamed occupied village that shows them entering a small private residence and finding Ukrainian flags and Ukrainian training manuals for sabotage and subversive work. While the video appears highly staged and choreographed, it demonstrates that law enforcement operations in occupied areas particularly target anything and anyone deemed to show pro-Ukrainian sentiments. The Ukrainian Resistance Center remarked on March 21 that Russian forces raided homes in the Azov village near Berdyansk, occupied Zaporizhia Oblast, to conduct preventative searches and threaten residents who do not hold Russian passports, arbitrarily detaining those who refuse to apply for Russian citizenship. Russian occupation officials continue to facilitate the deportation of Ukrainian children to Russia. Kherson Oblast occupation head Vladimir Saldo reported on March 21 that he signed an agreement with All Russian Children's Center Okhin director Natalia Solovey that stipulates that children from occupied Kherson Oblast will go to rest and study at the Okhin camp near Vladivostok, Primorsky Krai. Okhin is funded and directed by the Russian government and Ministry of Education, according to its website. Vladivostok is closer to the American state of Alaska, approximately 5,000 kilometers, than it is to Kherson Oblast, over 7,000 kilometers. Russian occupation officials continue efforts to consolidate bureaucratic and administrative control of occupied areas of Ukraine. The Kherson Oblast Occupation Administration stated on March 21 that people with disabilities will need to undergo re-examination under Russian legislation for the reissuance of their disability status. Occupation authorities are therefore weaponizing the issuance of disability status to require individuals to register and provide personal information to occupation organs. Russian occupation authorities also continue to push for the issuance of Russian passports in occupied territories. Zaporizhia Oblast occupation head Yevgeny Balitsky claimed on March 21 that 30% of residents, 164,577 people, of occupied Zaporizhia Oblast have received Russian passports and that there are 16 stationary and 2 mobile departments operating in the oblast for the receipt and issuance of passport documents. The Luhansk People's Republic, LNR, Ministry of Internal Affairs, MVD, similarly claimed on March 21 that it opened a checkpoint for passport application and issuance in Belolutsk and that the checkpoint received over 200 passport applications on the day of its opening. The number of Russian passport applications and holders are likely purposefully overblown by occupation officials, and the actual process for application is likely becoming increasingly coercive. Ukrainian Luhansk Oblast Military Administration noted that Russian occupation officials have greatly accelerated the process for renouncing Ukrainian citizenship in Luhansk Oblast, likely to expedite the Russian passport application process. Significant activity in Belarus, ISW assesses that a Russian or Belarusian attack into northern Ukraine in early 2023 is extraordinarily unlikely and has thus restructured this section of the update. It will no longer include counterindicators for such an offensive. ISW will continue to report daily observed Russian and Belarusian military activity in Belarus, but these are not indicators that Russian and Belarusian forces are preparing for an imminent attack on Ukraine from Belarus. ISW will revise this text and its assessment if it observes any unambiguous indicators that Russia or Belarus is preparing to attack northern Ukraine. The Ukrainian General Staff continued to note on March 21 that Belarus is providing its military infrastructure for the training of Russian troops and that Russia maintains a significant military presence in Belarus. Belarusian forces continued various military exercises on March 21. The Belarusian Ministry of Defense, MOD, reported that the 103rd Vitebsk Separate Airborne Brigade started brigade-level tactical exercises to practice unit maneuver, combat fire, and UAV operations. The Belarusian MOD also noted that the Belarusian Signal Corps is holding tactical and special training classes until March 25 under head of the Belarusian Communications Department, Colonel Vadim Romanev. Belarusian President Alexander Lukashenko additionally held a meeting on external and internal security threats. The ISW releases daily reports. Subscribe to be kept up to date.